you have got to stop waiting for your libido to come back. The more I get you to start having sex that feels good in a present connected way, the more your desire for that sex is going to come back.
I'm so excited to have you today, Sophia, from the V Project as well as Sex After Kids. And I want to hear about both of those things, if they're different, if they're the same, how. Um, I was drawn to you because you had interviewed Rahi Chun, who I have studied with. And then I just looked around at what you were doing, and I just love your niche of working with particularly libido for moms with kids, and how that so resonates for women in peri and post and menopause. The libido issue is just such a big thing, and you talk so, I mean, you go into it, and I so appreciate your podcast. Like, oh my God, I haven't heard anyone dissect and analyze it, and your quiz, and like, I'm really impressed with all that you are doing, and love that you're TMI as well. You your TMI bestie, and I'm like, oh, got to talk to her. So, would you like to just tell us how you were drawn to being a sex educator, and what kind of sex educator you are and all that sort of thing?
Yeah. First of all, just thanks so much for having me. And I'm so glad that it's been resonating for you. Like, it's just so lovely to hear that feedback. Yeah, so I mean, I got into sex coaching a couple of different ways. I guess I could say the big story for me in my 20s, particularly around my Saturn return, if we've got some astrology people on your crew, um, was I had struggled with my orgasm most of my 20s. I had a particular period with a particular partner where I was constant UTIs, constant bacterial vaginosis, constantly at the doctor, and bordering on constant pain during intercourse. So I was like flirting with a vaginismus or vulvodynia diagnosis, which, if people don't know, is kind of when your vagina has a tendency to like clamp up, tighten up, lock down whenever intercourse is on the table. And I was just kind of having this like existential moment of like, do those touch the universe orgasms like even exist, or is this all BS, you know? And so through my own journey, through my own work, this was all, of course, pre-children for me. I realized that I was at war with my own body. I was at war with my vagina. I was in this adversarial position with her where I was blaming her, angry with her, frustrated she couldn't like cooperate and get on board. And when I finally clued in that I just wasn't listening to her, and I wasn't in right relationship with her, you could say, everything changed, right? As soon as I realized my vagina was telling me exactly what she needed, and if I could just listen, then all the things could open up for us, right? So that's what started for me. And along the lines, I became a certified Tantra coach, which is how I would have kind of where I connect with Rahi. So de-armoring and like using energy work, breath work, and massage work to help my vagina let go of the junk in the trunk, I call it. The trauma, the shame, the stories that we have around sex so that we can open more into that pleasure. And I also became a sex educator. So I've done a lot of work in schools and classrooms with kids, with teens, with young people. And then I had a stepson who joined my life, and I found myself in what I call married with kids sex land. So this relationship was very different than my others, where I wasn't necessarily dealing with libido issues at the time, but I was used to sex like 2 to 3 times a day, almost every day with like previous partners. And that was not the case when there was a child in my life and in my home, right? And then I had two babies of my own, and they are 3 and 6 now. So I've got a 13, a 6, and a 3-year old. And I have had to reinvent my sex life each time. And in particular, after my daughter, who's my oldest child that came out of my body, I just became very fascinated with the nexus of sexuality and motherhood or postpartum because, and like I talk about in my podcast, there's physical things that are different in that period to a person who's never had kids. A baby came out of your vagina or was cut out of your belly. A baby was in your body for 9 months. So there's all kinds of like physical things. You're breastfeeding. There are hormone changes that are happening that are unique to that period and uniquely affect libido in that period. And there's also emotional stuff that changes, first of all, from your identity and sense of self and like reconciling being a mother and a sexual person, which is harder for some of us than others. But also the equity in our relationship can shift dramatically. So even if things were split pretty evenly in terms of like chores and household and money making before kids, and even if we have a quote unquote like progressive husband, things can shift dramatically after kids because we have all these gender norms, these scripts, these expectations that like wake up in us based on the household that we woke up in. And so our relationship dynamics can shift hugely. And the sort of spiritual dynamics, or like and when I say spiritual, I mean more like that philosophical, like sense of self, connection to the world, like that sort of piece. And then if you do participate in a religion or a spirituality or a faith, that can have an interplay too. So I just became very fascinated with that. And libido is probably the number one thing that couples after kids struggle with. Women in general don't have one anymore, or struggle to find it. But men or people with penises can also struggle with like stress, depression, pressures of parenthood. Um, and also, what was I going to say, like time when we're dealing with the chaos of kids, like just time to be naked together and alone. There's like this, what am I going to say? This like, so many things have to line up perfectly in order for us to like have a good time together. And then you add many of us having kids later, being on our perimenopause journey, or even our menopause journey with teens in the house. And there's just like a really fascinating nexus of things happening that I don't feel like people are talking about, or I feel like the advice is not often realistic to my life with three kids. So my focus has been, how do I give advice to people who are in this time period that's specific to what their bodies and brains are going through and realistically achievable in the amount of time that they have available to them.
So good. So good. And I love how, I don't know which podcast it was you were talking about, that like there's so much to the libido piece. Like, for example, when you're talking about comparing your libido to your partner and how, or to movies, and how it should be like, oh, you should be so turned on. That's the only time to have sex is if you're really turned on. You can't be so turned on, then you shouldn't bother. Like that is gold right there. So would you like to say more about that?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because for your people who are in menopause, whose kids might be older, who maybe sometimes you do have more time when your kids are 15 and sometimes you don't, you're like staying up late and worrying about other things than your 3-year-old tucked in bed. Um, but I think the beauty of my approach is like, it's very much focused on you could replace becoming a mother with like any massive life change or shift. So part of my approach is that really, quite honestly and bluntly, most of us have gotten away with pretty mediocre sex skills up until this transition happens. And you either didn't really need to think about how your body worked because it just did, or you fumbled through. You didn't need to think about how you invited your partner into, sexy connection with you, or you didn't think about how you invited yourself to it. You just like did your thing without thinking about it very much. And now none of those like old go-to strategies are working for you anymore. And that might be because your body literally likes different things now. So maybe you were really into nipple play before you had kids, and now like your body's just like, no, thank you. Or maybe your vagina, your vulva is responsive to like different kinds of touch now, or it's more tender certain times of the month or certain areas. So it's like in some ways we're starting from scratch. It's like imagine you have a new body. Your partner doesn't know this body anymore. You may not know their body. And instead of just trying to like, I think of it as like, what's the analogy? Just like using old tools to try to get new results, right? And we somehow get stuck in this notion that sex is not a skill. It's something I'm just innately good at. I was like born a five-star sex god, I guess. And I think there's a pressure on men in particular for that. And so we don't think to learn new skills. And partially because sex ed is so shitty, we don't even know what skills we don't have. We don't know there's ways to support our nervous system into sex. We don't know there's ways to communicate to support our nervous system into sex. We literally don't even know the anatomy of arousal for both penises and vaginas and like how to actually operate that machinery when it comes to pleasure. And so we're often like driving blind in a new landscape, trying to make old things, old strategies and old tools work for us, and they just don't anymore. And so one of the very first things is like, never mind if there's more complex emotional stuff and we're feeling resentment and frustration, like you literally may just need some sex ed. And this is why counseling doesn't always solve this problem because a counselor is not going to tell you how a vagina works. I'm going to tell you how a vagina works and how to make a vagina work and feel good, right? So it's not the whole piece of the puzzle, but it's a big part of it. More, I think, than people realize. And then the second piece around libido is, and it's interesting because I've shifted a bit on this. Um, 3, 4 years ago when I was getting really into this, I was obsessed with kind of like, let's find the root cause of why your libido is low and fix it. And on the one hand, I'm still there because if it is just a matter of like sex hurts every time I have sex, like, of course, your libido is not going to wake up. So if we fix the pain, your libido will come back. Maybe it is a matter of waiting for your hormones to shift. Maybe it is a matter of changing the childcare and chore labor division in your home so that there's less resentment. And those are true and real pieces. And also, I find now like they become excuses or reasons to not show up and experiment. So it becomes a when I'm done breastfeeding, when we're sleeping through the night and I'm not so fatigued anymore, when I'm no longer frustrated with my partner, when this, when that, when this, when the perfect conditions arrive, then I will restart my sex life. And the problem with that is there is never going to be perfect conditions. Your 20s was probably the perfect conditions in terms of your hormone balance, in terms of kids, no kids in your life and schedule. And in terms of also like early stages of a relationship where our libido, no matter how old we are, early stages, right? Things are exciting and all that stuff. But when we're in a long-term committed relationship with someone we want to stay with, and we're older and we've got body aches and pains and hormones that are transitioning and work stress that's fluctuating and parents that are going to pass away or whatever, like you could wait forever for the perfect conditions to arrive and you will let your sex life slip and it will erode your relationship. And I don't like being this doom and gloom person who's like, let's avoid pain. But like, lack of sex life is like one of the top reasons people get divorced, which to me is a preventable thing. Certain relationships need to end absolutely. And sometimes we're just letting really good relationships die on the vine because of these like sexpectations we have, I call them, because we think we just need to wait till our libido comes back. We don't have sex for weeks and months and years. And then 20 years of not feeling wanted by somebody, and we just go find the shiny new because, like, why wouldn't we? Right. So, one of my biggest ahas for me, and like things I really want to encourage people is like, you have got to stop waiting for your libido to come back. And it's also a chicken and egg. Like the more I get you to start having sex that feels good in a present connected way, the more your desire for that sex is going to come back. And you will like it's not desiring proof, but you'll like protect your sex life from any kind of outside change or factors when you have these tools. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Yes. And I think that you also talk about the importance of self-pleasure. I mean, it's not just having sex with your partner. You might not even be in a relationship and have libido issues. This is very, I mean, that was my thing.
Hmm.
So, I mean, and, or you can have it and then the pain sets in and then you don't want to deal with that. I mean, there's so many different things where libido just sort of fritters away. But how important for you is the self pleasure and what you teach women?
I mean, self-pleasure is like a huge piece of the puzzle. I've been focusing on it a little bit less lately because I find people shut down more about that sometimes, especially when they're in a relationship, than they do about like finding a way to have productive and like fun sex with their partner. But certainly when I think of like self-pleasure is I always say that like nothing I teach is rocket science. You've heard it a million times. You've just never actually done it. And the example is I for sure in my 20s heard like get to know your body, only, like all that advice and was like, yeah. And then it was like, oh, now, when I called the sex coach and she was like, you can come sit on my couch and tell me, all the reasons you think sex is shameful and naughty, but she's like, you legit just don't know how to have an orgasm. And you have to learn, and the way that you do that is by touching yourself. Is huge. And so in particular, if you've got pain, or in particular if your vagina and vulva like don't respond to sex in the same way that they used to, spending that time mapping out your own body, mapping out what feels good, mapping out what hurts, and knowing how to work around that by yourself is the way that you are better able to give clear direction and support to your partner to please you. And also, like on a more philosophical level, masturbation, I would say in mindful and intentional ways. So we're not trying to wham bam, thank you, ma'am, ourselves. This is not like rubbing one out before bedtime just so you can sleep. We can use, right? The Tantra coach in me is like, we can use self pleasure as a way to cultivate that sexual energy, that horny energy, that libido energy, that eroticism, like for life energy, right? And so it's hugely important that way, not only to be able to communicate to your partner what's working for your body now, today, but to like cultivate that connection with yourself. And there's so much healing work that you can do with tools like Tantra, which is just really breath work, meditation, and like massage work with your bits. Um, to clear up any kind of trauma that you have, and we all have it, whether we were catcalled the wrong way or just forced ourselves to have sex more times than we wanted, or if we've actually lived assault. And even just now, with all the lack of safety, I think women in particular can feel in the world with abortion bans and all the things, right? Like your vagina muscles are like literally contracting and armoring up against all that, which is why Rahi's work is so important. Rahi does de-armoring work, which is helping your vagina to go, okay, being naked can be fun, can be relaxing, can be safe for me. Yeah.
Wonderful. And so what was the Happy V project versus the Sex After Kids? What are
Yeah, I mean, essentially, they're just two brands I'm playing with. So the whole project, everything started as the Happy Vagina Project for me. When I was first coaching, I was focused a lot more on, speaking of self-pleasure, this connection between women and their sexuality and their like leadership and how they're showing up in the world. And so one of the seminal books I read on my journey was by Naomi Klein. It's called Vagina, a New Biography. And she talked about how if women were actually having great orgasms, we'd be like leading the world because of the like superpowers it gives us and how we view the world and
right?
all these things. And so the argument is like we are, our sexuality is shamed and shut down and reduced to biological production. As a means of control over us in all parts of our lives. Like it starts with control of our body and our reproductive abilities as a way to keep us out of our power. And so that's where the Happy Vagina Project kind of started. And then Sex After Kids just kind of got born out of like wanting to work more with kids or sorry, Sex After Kids came out of wanting to work more with parents who have children. Although I love teaching sex ed to toddlers and littles, teaching them about their bodies and consent. And also because I have shifted away from working exclusively with women and wanting to call men into this picture. And also people who are, not in the gender binary, but specifically like I'm a cis hetero woman and I know what the lived challenges are there. And the orgasm gap is very real and it's real in heterosexual relationships. It's real in relationships where men and women are together. And I am on a mission to abolish that orgasm gap and keep relationships together and keep families strong. And so, just like in my feminism, like I've worked at a women's center, we can't end violence against women without engaging men. We can't improve the sexual experiences of women without engaging men. And so my new approach, like, um, I guess I just got frustrated with working with women where, um, I was like, I can empower you and make you feel great in your body and all these things. And all I'm going to do is like make you leave your partner because you're going to like blossom into this like fantastic person and you're going to have new amazing boundaries and all the things. But if I don't also help him to develop new sex skills and a new perspective about sex, I'm I'm not achieving my goal of like keeping this couple together if that's their intention and if that's the healthiest and right thing for them. So yeah, Sex After Kids, long story short, is just meant to be a brand to be able to engage more men in the process.
I love it. I love it. Um, what else? Oh, and I love also how you're so real and raw about your own struggles and
Mm.
challenges, and just wondering how that's been received and how that works for you in you sharing your work.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been my style. And I think for me, it's just it's the aha moments from my own relationship. Like a couple of months ago, I had this moment where I was like, oh, I'm cut and stuck in my own literal tug of war within myself. My partner's made a move. Half of me's like, yeah, I could do this. Half of me's like, I don't want to do this. And I was like, this is not an argument with him. This is an argument within my own body. And how do I like transform that? And so I just find it's like the realest way I can share things and the best like it's how I teach is to just try to share like really real moments. I think sometimes people are curious like what my husband thinks. And he knows. He's cool. And I always try to share things from this is like my perspective, my story of this half, and like what's going on for me in my body. I do joke sometimes. It's really funny that I like can't have sex anymore without like observing what's happening, so I can take the lesson from it and turn it into a blog post or a podcast episode. um, but I just think like so much of the Happy Vagina Project for me or Sex After Kids is also just about like destigmatizing these conversations. Like so many of us are struggling with this, whether it's libido, whether it's feeling pressure and expectation from our partner. So many of us are feeling like lonely and disconnected in our own relationships, and it doesn't have to be that way. And so, really, my goal with that is just to be like, there are other people like me who have struggled with this, and there are very easy things that you can do.
But I think what I so appreciate is that, there are many stories that you hear from, some of the other sex coaches who are specifically focusing on these cosmic orgasms and this, that, and the other, and how when women start having them, then everything is just perfect and everything is wonderful. And
Mhm.
you make it seem, and I think it's much more realistic, and maybe it's just different for different women, but like you can have some progress and then, I mean, you've got an autoimmune that you're dealing with or something. And so you've got these realities that come in, and so it's not like this awesome forever thing. It's like this up and down,
Mhm.
and how do you keep getting back up when you come down from that high of like thinking that you solved it, you know?
Yeah, and it's so the more I coach, the more you're like, whether it's finance, whether it's relationship, whether it's your business, it's all the same thing. Change happens 1% at a time, not these massive overhauls, these grand gestures, and it's never like one and done and fixed forever. And that's partially because, and what people forget is like your sexuality is deeply tied to your body. Your body is not a static thing. It's going to shift over time. And it's tied to your sense of identity, which is also not a static thing. And it's tied to your relationship, which is also not a static thing. So all three of these pieces are constantly evolving and shifting. And I think we've finally come to understand like seasons of motherhood, right? You're going to have seasons of your sex life. And for sure, anyone who's got a kid under three, like, take most of my advice with a grain of salt. Do what you can, but you're not sleeping. You're a zombie. Like, do not add this to the pressure list. Your only goal is to try to remain kind and connected to your partner. Or I call it sort of like holding onto your hand in the dark. So when we get out of the cave, we're still touching, you know? And don't let that become such an ingrained habit that your kids are 5 and 7 and 10 and you haven't gotten back into any kind of naked, sexy fun times, as I call it. And I'm deliberately trying to position myself as like, when we're after kids, like there is a time and place for cosmic sex, and I am excited for that. And it is not right now. And when I'm talking to people who haven't touched or kissed or been naked together in a couple of weeks or a couple of months or a couple of years, massive, cosmic, amazing, mind blowing orgasms like cannot be the goal for right now. We're not going to get there. The goal has to be we're getting naked and present and connected in bed on a frequency that feels good for us. And maybe that's once every 6 months. Maybe that's once a month. Maybe that's once a week. And we're just, that's our goal is to like get in that rhythm. And that's what my signature program helps people to do. Because once you do that, then you can add the cosmic, fantastic, whatever you want to that practice. But if you haven't even touched each other in 6 months, like it's too far of a leap.
Right. And I also like the way you talk about when there's not a whole lot of libido going on, there's still that doesn't mean you don't have sex.
Yes.
Don't
And I think,
sexual exploration.
yes. And this is people just get stuck in. If I'm not ragingly rip your clothes off horny, then I'm forcing myself to have sex. Or a lot of people will be like, it's Valentine's Day. Like, I guess we should. I'll get into it halfway through. It's no big deal. But that first 10, 20, 30 minutes still feels painful, frustrating. Like, and your body's not into being forced in that way either, right? And so I've been joking lately, like, I help people with the first 10 minutes. It's the transition. And the light bulb that went off for me lately was, in the early days of even this relationship, which is almost 10 years old now. So there's all the novelty, right? And you're not living together and all the things. And also there's alcohol involved at almost every date, right? So it's easier in the way most of us have learned to go from like, we've had a fun night out, we've watched a movie, we'd have dinner, we've had a couple beers, we're going home. Everyone's feeling warm, fuzzy, lubricated, and like that feels easy to do. That's like a quote unquote natural transition. And it's something we see in the movies all the time, right? What we don't see is it's 8 o'clock. You just finished the laundry. I just finished the dishes. We're sitting in bed, and someone turns to the other and goes, "Do you wanna?" And you can have a super graceful transition to fun, sexy times from that. But people go, "Well, I'm not there. I'm not in the headspace. I've got a messy bun and ketchup all over me. And like, I'm not sexy." Like, they can't, there's a cognitive dissonance where they're like, I can't go from like that to this. So I'm like, you have to build a bridge. And I call that the pre-launch checklist. So just like the astronauts have to like go through all their like clicking and clacking and whatever to get lift off, All you need are three things to go from mom and dad mode, I call it, to like lover mode. And that's just like one thing to get you relaxed, one thing to get you feeling like kind of sexy, and one thing to get you feeling connected. And if that's your only goal, like someone goes, you wanna? And we go, okay, what can we do to feel relaxed right now? What can we do to feel sexy? What can we do to feel connected? You have built a bridge that then makes it easier for your brain to go, yeah, okay, I could do that now. And I think that's like the missing piece. We're just asking ourselves to go from 0 to 60. And people's brains, especially women's, are like, I'm not there. I can't do this. So it's a no.
Right.
And I always talk about it as like we need to learn how to throw a party our libido wants to come to. Most of us don't understand how libido actually works, right? So we're learning that it's responsive, not spontaneous. That's language popularized by Emily Nagoski in her book Come As You Are, right? That we're not all walking around horny all the time, but we need a an input, an invitation for our body to go, ooh, maybe I could. So
Mm.
that if you implement something that makes you feel relaxed, connected, sexy, then you've got something to respond to rather than you wanna. And each person's libido works a different way. We've got things that hit the brakes for us and things that hit the gas pedal. And when you know what those things are, you get to construct the environment to work in your favor. And all of a sudden, your libido's like, oh yeah, I could come to this party instead of fuck no, I don't want to go there. Yeah, we just have to get away from this like when I feel turned on, then I will want sex. And instead tune into when I have an intention to connect with my partner, I can give myself an invitation to make that sexual if I want to or not. And if I'm intentional about it in some really small ways, my body will come along for the ride if she wants to, and we will have an amazing time. And I think of it this way, like every time I use the headache, the tiredness, the I'm going to do laundry instead excuse or reason, and this is not to say like sometimes we just legitimately don't want to, and that is okay. Like we are all about honoring the no here. But there's a lot of times where it's not necessarily a hard no. It's like either it's a habit to say no, or it's like a deflection for something else, right? And every time I do that is a moment I've opted out of connection with my partner. And when I do that over and over and over again, but people are going, Sophia, like I just want to feel connection in my relationship. And I'm like, but you're opting out of it all the time. You're opting for the book, you're opting for the hobby, you're opting for the workout. And I'm not saying don't do those things ever. I'm just saying like maybe once out of every 10 times you like opt for the connection and take the pressure off of it being naked, but opt for the connection with the invitation that maybe it could be naked and see what happens, right? And it's kind of like, what do they say? I think it's a Buddhist thing where they're like the, oh, what is it? The answer is through. Anyway, that's like the problem is the solution.
Mm.
So you feel like the problem is you're not having sex and you don't want sex and all that stuff. And I'm like, the solution to wanting more sex and to feeling more connected in your relationship and to feeling more fun and flirt and all that stuff is to find a way to have sex where you're not forcing yourself to have sex. And that's what I do.
Beautiful. So you're not forcing yourself to have it, and yet you're still going forward.
You're initiating it. Yeah. Yeah. So, like, an example would be two things. So, I can give two examples, which you may or may not have heard on the podcast, but I can share them here. So, one is instead of, and I'm blanking right now, but we have this formula in our head that, like, I'm attracted to you, therefore I desire sex, therefore I'm going to have great hot sex, right? And I'm like, what if we just have an intention to connect with our partner and we get present and relaxed? Then we might actually have some good sex. And so an example is both my partner and I kind of work from home. We came home after walking the kids to school. We had like half an hour, 40-minute window. And the thought that crossed my mind wasn't, damn, I want to get laid. It wasn't, oh, I'm so horny right now. The thought that crossed my mind was, it's been 2 weeks. We have a window. I would like to feel connected to my partner in this way. Maybe I can get my body on board. That's a very different thought process, right? But I tuned into that. So I told my partner, like, hey, maybe. And the code I have now is like naked, sexy fun times is pressure free. The goal is naked and fun. Maybe sex happens, right? So when I look at him and go, naked, sexy fun times, we know like we're just going to go try to create the right environment and we'll see what happens.
Mm.
Then we've got our little pre launch checklist, which just means I know there's a certain song that gets me in the mood. If we do the lighting right, my body gets less distracted. And if we do a little like 10 minutes of this game that we like to play, I'm feeling like loose and relaxed and whatever, right? And 9 times out of 10, that's all I need, and we've gone there. And there's two possible outcomes for that scenario. So one is I open myself to the invitation and we have a great sexual encounter. Awesome. And I can't begin to tell you the appreciation I get from my partner when I choose to initiate in that way because it's rare for me to initiate. And so he just feels so wanted and so desired when I'm able to like support myself to tune in to just that small desire to connect, right? The outcome we avoid is what if we do all that work and 20, 30 minutes later, I haven't gotten on board with it and we don't go all the way? Aren't we both just going to feel frustrated and irritated and all the things? And my answer to that is like, if you put a lot of pressure or expectation that it was going to lead to sex, yeah. But even if we didn't have penetrative sex, we still spent half an hour naked, laughing together, experimenting, connecting, touching, and having a nice time. So that is going to teach my body that we can get naked and have a pressure-free time. And so maybe next time I'll be more excited. So either way, I've made an investment in how I want to feel in my relationship, which is connected, flirty, fun, whether actual intercourse happened or not. And even I used to like wake up, I'm ovulating, I'm feeling in the mood, and I'm terrified that if I tell my partner now, by the time 10 p.m. rolls around tonight, I'm not going to feel the same way.
Right.
So what would have been the point? And
Right.
I'm like, cuz I would have spent the day fostering that feeling, flirting with him, having a good time. And even if 10 o'clock came around and bedtime was a disaster and I had to look at him and go rain check, I still had a way more fun and flirty day than I would have normally.
Love that.
And that is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, to have more juice in your life, whether it's
Yeah.
acted on and turns into sex, penetrative sex, the
Yeah.
is the life force, and you're getting that all day long. And it's
Yeah.
authentic, right? You're not performing it.
Yes.
There's a lot of performance patterning that goes on as well. And I'm wondering if you've dealt with a lot of that.
Tons. Spectatoring is my favorite term I've ever encountered. And it's just this idea like you can imagine, you got two options, okay? You can imagine a person with a clipboard in the corner while you're having sex, or like even this whole time judging you. You're not sexy enough. He's not going to be interested. Why are you touching him like that? Why are you kissing him like that? Why are you moaning like that? Or you can imagine a cheerleader in the corner who's like, damn girl, you're sexy. You got this. But spectatoring is huge. This is tied to the male gaze. This is tied to our expectations of what sexy is, what sexy looks like, how to perform sexy.
That's the thing that I,
Instead of, yeah, instead of coming from connection.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that unless you have this energy of, oh, I'm so hot for you, they're not going to feel your partner isn't going to feel that you're really into it enough if you don't perform this.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
And like, so much of this is like about getting present into your own body. And like, I'm that story I just told, I'm sure. So, first of all, we got into bed, and I was like, how do I even kiss you again? Like, I was having this moment where things felt really awkward. which I think happens when it's not often. And it also happens when it's like out of nowhere. There's no alcohol, there's no preamble, there's no nothing. Like we had literally just walked our kids to school and then we were, right? And I was like, oh, how do I do this? And we played the 3 minute game. And that's something we'll share the quiz results at the end, the quiz at the end of the podcast. But if people take the quiz, they get the 3 minute game as like a little walkthrough, like date activity. And all that is like I call it the may I, would you be willing game, where you take turns being like, would you be willing to massage the back of my neck? Would you be willing to do this? May I slowly kiss your lips, or may I slowly bite your shoulders, whatever it is. And so you're practicing making requests, you're practicing saying yes or no. But the beauty is my body only has to say yes or no to that specific request.
Mm.
And so part of why we get shut down sometimes is we're making out and my body's instantly going, I'm going to have to do all the things. I can't say yes to all the things right now. But if I can say yes to you, you know, licking my collarbone, and that's all I'm saying yes to, then I'll just relax and enjoy that happening. And then I'll say yes to something else. And then I'll say yes to something else. And ideally, I call it like creating these breadcrumbs all the way to wherever we want to go to, right? And that helps you land in your body and into your pleasure and into the moment and get out of your brain and like all the things, right? Um, and there was something else I wanted to say, but it has escaped my mind. So I mean, this just all gets back to like the skills of sex
Right.
that most of us have not learned, right? We have learned performative sex. We have learned shove your face together, shove your genitals together. That will create a great time. And that's it. And like, we haven't talked about outer course, which is like everything but penetration and how much of a fun time you can have just doing that. Um, because we have such a narrow definition of sex, that limits our abilities. Like, I could still have sex when my vagina is hurting. If we're talking about menopause and all of a sudden I've got, I forget what it's called, like lichen sclerosis, where I literally have eczema on my vulva and I get these like flashes every once in a while. You can let that be a reason you never have sex again. And I get it. It doesn't feel comfortable and all the things. And you can broaden your idea of what it means to be sexual with another person and still have lovely, yummy, juicy orgasms and connected times with your partner. So we've got to broaden our definition of what sex is, what sexuality is, what that looks like. Um, we get older and our partner has a softer penis and erections are harder. We could take medication if we want, if that feels like the right choice for us. And there might be some things happening there that we want to look into with a doctor. And we can also learn to have lovely, yummy sex with a softer penis. Like, again, that's another expectation, right? So we got to like roll with the punches and ditch the expectations, as I say.
You called it also great sexpectations on one of your podcasts, which is great. Yeah, it's like not just women who are having these struggles, the soft penis issue for men, and yeah, there's just it's so much more complex and layered than we realize, and we've got such a simple black and white about what sex is, and it's just so limiting. And I think,
Very much so.
right?
Yeah.
And it's almost like these issues that come up, like whether it's an autoimmune or a health challenge or a painful or menopause or a aging or kids or, exhaustion and all these things. It's almost like they're wonderful gifts to like expand. Otherwise, you won't have good sex. You just won't. If you're stuck in
Yeah.
the paradigm of black and white sex, this is it.
Yes, and I always just say like any kind of major transition like that is an invitation to broaden your expectations about anything. And at the Sex After Kids Summit that I had recently in November, I had a disability expert on, and we were talking about in particular, like the difference between being born with a disability, especially like a physical one, and like acquiring one, like having an accident that renders you in a wheelchair, and how it's a very different process for people of acceptance and grief and all the things. And also, in either situation, it's about focusing on what is possible focusing on what feels good, like what Adrienne, that yoga teacher, find what feels good, um, and focusing on the play, right? And so, like, it is all complex and there's so many factors and all these things. And you can also narrow it down to how can I find relaxed, present, naked connection with my partner? How can I find what feels good when I'm naked with my partner for this body that I'm in today, right? And that's why I love Rahi's work around, like, he did a session on mapping the erogenous zones and like talking about the neck and the earlobes and the back of the knee and all these other parts of your body that could even give you an orgasm if you learn how to, without anyone even touching your vagina or your penis. And so, like, the body is capable of so much if we allow it to be, and all we need to do is play to find it.
Absolutely. And I mean, I feel very fortunate because I have a sex exploration partner who's very open to play, but I don't know that that's an easy thing to find. And I'm just wondering if you even have to deal with that and encourage people to get into that mode.
So to me, it's part of this expectations, right? And in particular for dudes, it's like getting over this ego piece of like what makes a good lover. Like an absolute stellar lover is a creative, playful, listening, curious person who is going to ask you what you want and learn what you want over and over and over again. And um, that goes for either gender, right? But we've been told it's about how big we are, it's about how fast we are, it's about how long we last, it's about how big our orgasms are. It's about how much we like choke or like dominate or like the energy that we show up with. And I think there can be like the interesting thing for me here is so men get all those stories, especially, right? You're supposed to be the stud. You're supposed to like initiate me, pure virginal person, into the erotic arts. But also as women, we internalize that misogyny too. And what that looks like is when a man isn't acting in the ways we've been taught men are supposed to act, we get like confused. And my partner was like so consensual with me, the first couple weeks in particular, just like, really, are you comfortable with this? You want to do? And I was getting annoyed. I was like, we're naked together, like fucking obviously. It was a mental reframe for me to be, it is sexy that my partner is checking in with me. It is sexy that my partner is asking me if I'm comfortable, not what the fuck is he doing? And that's internalized misogyny. That's me. It's kind of like we say we want men who are like more in touch with their emotions and more communicative, and then we get one and we go, what the fuck, you wimp? Like, I have felt that reaction in myself. And you're like, whoa, like it runs that deep because I've been taught that that's not attractive.
Right.
Even though I want it intellectually, I've been taught that a man isn't supposed to be that way. I've been taught a man's supposed to be stoic and distant and kind of mysterious and make me want to chase him and all these things. And like, coming back to movies, like, we don't have models for healthy relationships because they don't make for good TV. There's no drama, so they're not interesting. And I've been watching that new Kirsten Bell show with the rabbi. I think it's called Nobody Wants This.
Yeah,
And I was
yeah.
like, this is a healthy relationship, but they added the drama by making him a rabbi and like them so different so that
Right.
they could make the relationship healthy. And so so we have to like deprogram those pieces in ourselves, right? And the bottom line that I try to share with people is, like, can you make a souffle without even thinking or looking at a recipe right now? I don't know how to make a souffle. The first time I try to make the souffle, I'm going to have the recipe, I'm going to buy the ingredients, I'm going to do my best, and then I'm not really going to know what it's supposed to look like or what consistency it's supposed to be or like how brown it's supposed to be when it comes out of the oven or like whatever. Um, I can only learn that by like making 10 souffles that suck or by having someone literally show me how to make amazing souffle. And so, as a culture, especially when we're younger, it's not appropriate for people to teach you how to make souffle unless they're making the souffle with you and they're just more experienced. You got to like make some souffle together until you can do it. And so that exploration piece is like we don't have a lot of tolerance for failure in the bedroom, right? Back to that performance piece. It's supposed to be amazing all the time. And a big goal for Naked Sexy Fun Times is like the first time you try anal, for example, with this particular partner, like don't expect it to be perfect. Be like the intention of this first time is for us to mess it up. And our only goal is to learn what doesn't work and what we want to do better next time. And maybe it'll end up feeling great, but like don't make the objective be feeling great. And don't even make the objective to feel great like the first three times until you're like, oh, we need this much lube and this much warm up. And this toy actually feels better than your finger. And this made me relax. Then we can add the layer of like, this is going to feel really good.
It,
And we just don't give ourselves that room when we're trying new things. And so then think of it as like, even if you're trying nothing spectacular, if you're having sex after a baby, after menopause, during like after a big life transition, think of it as like, this is the first time we're doing this together. And we need to lower the bar, talk more, and play.
I think that's the talk more is such an important piece. Like if the guy, like you said earlier, if the guy is asking for consent, he's actually having a conversation with you, not just assuming. And
Yeah.
that's what's so scary is we're not used to having that realness of talking. It takes you out of this fantasy. Everything just flows into one thing to the other. But no, it's like, oh, we're pausing to actually talk. Oh, how's that going to impact the flow? It's the
Mhm.
most important thing, I think, what you're saying.
Totally. And two things. One, you can keep talking while there's flow. Absolutely. But again, that's another falsehood from the media, right? Where you're like, you know, that might be the truth of for like a 10-minute like sesh. But if we want to open up into like we got naked and played for 3 hours and had an amazing time, like there was some this, there was some that, there was some observing, there was some changing, there was some shifting, there was some in and out. And I think it's like when people hesitate for that, I'm like, well, you can not do it and just pray that everyone's having a good time and like not even really know. Or you can communicate and know that everyone's having a good time as long as everyone's being honest. And isn't that going to help you to be more relaxed and have a better time? And the other motivator I try to give people for communication is you're not in my body. You don't have my skin. You don't have my eyes. You don't have my senses. I have a different nose than you. I'm sensitive to different things. So, like, you literally have no way of knowing how anything you do to my body feels in my body unless I give you signals about how it's feeling.
Right.
And I think for sure, in particular, when we've been together for a while, we may have communicated more at the beginning, but then we get into habits and then we stop the communicating. And so, again, when we're in a period of transition, we need to amp up the communication again because we're in a period of new rediscovery. But also, like, the more we shut that down, the more we're shutting down that discovery phase. And so, think of it as like, for people who are sharing the feedback, like your partner may not know. As an example, I had an ex like back in high school. He would rub the top of my like finger and nail just like when we were cuddling and watching movies. And I don't know what, like I fucking hated it. If there was something about how it felt that like bothered me so much. I don't think I ever shared that with him. And I would just eventually like move my finger away or whatever. But like he had no way of knowing that that didn't feel good. And so if I had just been like, hey, you could even just say like, you could say something like that doesn't feel good. Could you try something else? Or you could say, hey, could you touch my hand like this instead? You don't even have to say the negative.
Right.
And two tips for people are in the moment, two of the easiest things you can communicate without rustling feathers are what you are enjoying and what you want more of, because that will naturally take you away from what you are not enjoying. If someone's rubbing your shoulder and you're hating it, just be like, could you rub my chest really lightly? And they're going to stop doing what you're hating and do something that you asked for. This is what do I want more of, and what is my body asking for?
That's awesome. I think we've hit our time limit, unfortunately. I
No worries.
have much more to talk about. Um, I just wanted to say one more thing that you were saying about yeah, how's my body responding? It's like, and you'd said this on a podcast, you could be even wet and not be actually connected to your pleasure. And you're not as turned on as your partner may think you are.
Mhm.
Like that's, but only through speaking is that going to be clear to them.
Them. Yeah,
So
totally.
that's really key. Like that's how important communication is. Because I had that
Mhm.
situation. I was kind of like, he's like, you're wet. And I'm like, oh, I just don't
Am I?
use because I don't feel like I should be. But yeah, so I really like this emphasis on speaking, which you talk about a lot in your podcast and
Yeah.
the tips on, and it's so, so valuable. Like, oh my God, that's
It's one of the four core ingredients for a reason.
absolutely. Well, tell us about your quiz and everything you want to.
Yeah. Like the final message wrap up, like really what I just want to tell people is whether you are struggling massively or just a little bit, there are things you can do. Sex education, like just understanding sex and your body more, is like one of the most simple things that you can do. And it can be fun, right? Like watch those TED Talks, there's so many things, but like, so two things. You don't have to continue suffering in silence. There are things that you can do. They are almost all of the time easier than you think, or more simple than you think. And learning together is one of the like starting points, I think, to develop that common vocabulary and just start playing together. Second, for people who are curious about like working with me, so yeah, there I'll share the link for the Solve Your Sex Drive quiz, which is just a simple quiz to kind of see which of the four core ingredients you need for your sex life are missing for you. And after the end of like each result takes you to a mini like 20-minute guided exercise that you can do, very sexy or very PG, your choice. So these are like embodiment exercises, which is so fun. And the other way to get started is I have my roommates to romance challenge. So for people who are feeling kind of like stuck in roommate mode and not sure how to get in like romance love mode, it's a 7-day challenge to basically help you plan a party your libido wants to show up to and warm up your body for a great time. So I will share the link for that. I'm not sure when this is going live. I'm doing the first round for Valentine's Day, but then it'll be available ongoing afterwards. And then, yeah, I'm available for one-on-one coaching, and I have a group coaching program that's going to be opening very soon called Sex After Kids. So people can always reach me in the DMs on Instagram, which I'll give you the link, or at my email address if they want to talk more.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophia. I love what you're doing. And I just so appreciate you for, I mean, every woman and man can get so much out of what you're talking about, no matter what stage, whether they have kids, whether they don't. Like, it's just such good information. And I so appreciate what you're doing.
You are welcome. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So welcome.